The dust had settled over the plains like a blanket of silence, and the heat hung heavy enough to choke the breath out of anything still living. No one rode these parts unless they had something to run from or something to hide. And that's exactly what she found. A man crumpled near the dry edge of her homestead, blood soaking into the earth, eyes half open like the light inside him was fading fast. His clothes were torn, his boots missing, and tied to his wrist was a broken chain. By every rule she knew, he was nothing but a thief, and a dying one at that. Mara had seen men like him before, outlaws crawling across the desert, desperate for water, shelter, or forgiveness. But there was something different in this one's face, something between shame and defiance, like he'd been running not just from men, but from something inside himself. Her first instinct was to shut the door, to pretend she hadn't seen the body in the dirt. But her second instinct, the one that sounded like her mother's voice echoing through time, told her no. So she dragged him inside, cleaned his wounds with what little she had, and sat by his side through the night, listening to the silence between his breaths. He never spoke a word while he healed, just watched her with a look that held more stories than 1,000 mouths could tell. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need answers. In the Old West, questions could be as dangerous as bullets. All that mattered was that he wasn't dead. Not yet. And as the days passed, he began to move again, slowly, carefully, as if learning how to live all over. Then, one morning, without a sound, he was gone. No note, no name, just an empty cot, a missing blanket, and a fire still warm from where he had sat. Weeks turned into months. Life returned to its rhythm. Mara chopped wood, fed the chickens, and kept her guard up like she always had. But something in her had shifted, a strange hollowness where mystery used to sit. Until the morning she woke to the sound of hooves, not one pair, but hundreds. She stepped on her porch and froze. Cresting the hill were riders, 500 warriors in formation, fierce and silent. And at their front, atop a black stallion, rode the man she had saved, no longer bleeding, no longer broken, but leading with fire in his eyes. This isn't a story about charity. It's a story about the weight of mercy and the storms it can summon. Because in the West, kindness doesn't just save a life, it writes a new one. What happened next would shake the dust off history and carve a new trail across a land that thought it had seen everything. But no one, not even Mara, could have imagined the truth he came back to deliver. The silence that followed the arrival of the riders was unlike anything Mara had ever known. The ground trembled beneath the weight of hooves and tension, and the air felt thick, like it was waiting for something to break. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the old axe she kept near the door, not out of fear, but out of instinct. She'd lived too long in the West to believe appearances alone. And yet, when the rider dismounted, the man she had once pulled from the dust, he approached not with weapons drawn, but with open hands and eyes that burned with something deeper than memory. He spoke her name, not loud, not proud, just a quiet murmur, like the wind brushing through dry grass. Mara, he said, and the way it fell from his lips made her freeze. It wasn't a greeting. It was something heavier, like gratitude wrapped in sorrow. She studied him, confused. The man she remembered had been broken, sunburned, near death. This one stood tall, scarred but whole, dressed in black leather lined with silver thread, and surrounded by warriors whose silence spoke louder than any shout. Without waiting for permission, he knelt before her, this man who now commanded 500, and placed a leather pouch at her feet. Inside it, coins, stones, and something she hadn't seen in over a decade, the pendant of her brother, lost during a raid she had never spoken of. Her breath caught. Her voice faltered. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, eyes locked on him. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You saved a dying man. I came back to repay a debt far older than mine." That night, a fire was lit in the center of the yard, and Mara's home, once a place of solitude and survival, became the heart of something much greater. The warriors gathered in a wide circle, and stories were shared in 3 languages, each one painting pieces of the puzzle Mara hadn't known she'd stepped into. The man she had saved was called Rael, once a thief, yes, but also a prince exiled for crimes he never committed. The chain on his wrist had been his sentence. The silence in his eyes had been the price. Mara listened, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. But inside, something shifted. All her life, she had believed survival was its own reward, that kindness should be quiet, invisible. But here, in the firelight, among strangers who bowed their heads when Rael spoke her name, she began to see that some acts ripple far beyond what the hands that offered them ever realize. And though she hadn't asked for it, she was now part of a story that had traveled miles through dust, blood, and betrayal, all because she chose not to let a man die alone in the dirt. The days that followed were filled with questions, not all asked aloud, but present in every glance and pause. Rael didn't stay in the house. He made camp with his warriors just beyond the tree line, maintaining a distance that felt deliberate. Still, each morning he came to the porch with something in hand: wild berries, a carved trinket, a fresh pelt, small offerings that said more than words ever could. Mara accepted them with nods, her guard still high. She didn't know what to make of him. Not yet. Gratitude was one thing, but this was something else. One afternoon, he asked to walk her land. "I need to see what you protected," he said. She agreed, though she kept a rifle slung across her back. As they moved through the fields and rocky outcroppings, he told her more. About the kingdom he'd been cast out of, the betrayal of his bloodline, the price he paid for another man's crime. He spoke of prison camps carved into cliffside caves, of escape under moonless skies, of years wandering nameless until her hands brought him back from the edge. He remembered every detail of that day. She, too, remembered, not for the drama of it, but for the weight it left on her chest. That night, the warriors sang, songs not of conquest, but of redemption. One ballad told the story of a woman who fed a dying wolf, and later found herself protected by a pack. Mara didn't ask, but she knew the story had been written for her. Still, she kept her distance. The West had taught her many things, but trust was not one of them. She had lived through loss, friends, family, her brother. Promises didn't mean much when the world had proven time and again that the only thing that stayed was the dust. Then came the letter, delivered on horseback by a rider bearing the seal of a neighboring town. It was a warning of a militia moving westward, burning everything in their path. A band of lawless men seeking vengeance for lands lost, striking anyone who might shelter traitors or strangers. Rael read it silently, then looked to Mara. "They're coming here," he said. "For me. For you. Because mercy looks like treason to men who've forgotten what mercy is." And for the first time in years, Mara felt something sharp and cold claw at her ribs. Not fear for herself, but for what her choice had brought upon her land. She had saved a man in silence. But the echo of that moment was now loud enough to wake the dead. And in that echo, 500 warriors readied their blades, not to take, but to defend the woman who had once defended them with nothing more than bread, water, and her bare, stubborn will. The wind shifted that night, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of smoke, distant but deliberate. Mara stood at the edge of her porch, eyes locked on the horizon, the rifle heavy in her arms. Rael joined her without a word, his gaze hard and unwavering. "They've already burned through 2 settlements," he said quietly. "They want blood. They want to make an example of anyone who stands with men like me." Mara didn't flinch. "Then they'll have to get through me," she said. It wasn't bravado. It was resolve, the kind forged by years of solitude and loss. She had nothing left to lose, except the peace she had built with her own 2 hands. Preparations began before the sun rose. Rael's warriors moved like a storm, silent, precise, unwavering. They reinforced the perimeter, set traps in the underbrush, and stationed sentinels on every hill. It was strange to see her land, once so quiet, alive with movement, discipline, and strategy. Mara moved among them like one of their own. She sharpened blades, portioned rations, tied her hair back like she had in the old days, before the world had grown too loud for dreams. This wasn't about saving Rael anymore. This was about saving what kindness had built. But the weight of consequence still gnawed at her. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't expected a thief to return as a commander. And yet, she didn't regret it. Because for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. These men, once feared and hunted, treated her with reverence, not because of power or title, but because she had chosen to see a man bleeding in the dust and reach for him instead of turning away. That act, so small at the time, had become something unshakable. On the third night, scouts returned with news. The enemy would reach them by dawn. They traveled fast, leaving fire and ruin in their wake. There would be no negotiation, no retreat, only war. Rael gathered his warriors beneath the old oak at the center of Mara's land. He spoke not as a ruler, but as a man bound by debt. "We don't fight for conquest," he said. "We fight for the hand that reached down when no one else did." And every man there, every warrior hardened by years of exile, lowered his head in silent agreement. That night, Mara sat alone on the porch, the rifle across her lap, the stars above so clear they looked like fresh-pressed silver. She thought of her brother, of the day he disappeared, of all the times she'd wanted to give up believing in good. And now, with fire on the wind and strangers in her fields, she realized something that made her heart ache. She hadn't just saved Rael, she had saved herself. The attack came at the first light. Not a scream, not a warning, just the sudden thunder of hooves and the sharp crack of gunfire. The militia swept in like a black wave, expecting to catch their prey off guard. But what they found was a wall of iron resolve, waiting for them with bows drawn, blades unsheathed, and a leader who had already died once and wouldn't die again without a fight. Rael led from the front, his presence steady as stone. Beside him, Mara stood atop her porch, rifle steady, eyes clear, heart like flint. The battle was fierce. Dust exploded beneath boots, fire licked the edges of the field, and the cries of war echoed across the valley. Mara fired with precision, not wildly, not in panic, but with the cold clarity of someone defending not just land, but memory. The militia pushed hard, arrogant and brutal, but Rael's men had something the others didn't: purpose. They weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting for a second chance, bought by a single act of mercy. At one point, Mara saw Rael fall. Her breath caught. But then he rose again, blood streaking his arm, blade in hand, eyes wild with the fire of someone who refused to let her sacrifice be in vain. She fought her way to him, covering his side with shot after shot until the field cleared, the enemy retreated, and the valley fell into silence once more. Smoke curled through the broken grass. Bodies lay still, and the morning sun rose over a land that had refused to be broken. When it was over, the survivors stood among the wreckage, shoulders heaving, hearts pounding. Rael approached Mara, blood on his brow, his voice low. "You didn't have to do this," he said. She looked at him, the rifle still in her hands, and replied, "Yes, I did. Because sometimes the right thing doesn't wait for the world to approve." He didn't respond. He only nodded, and in that nod was the weight of everything unspoken between them. The pain, the loyalty, the bond born not from romance, but from a deeper kind of trust. They buried the dead with honor, both friend and foe, and the warriors who remained planted new seeds in the blood-soaked soil, not to erase what had happened, but to remind those who came after that this land had been defended by mercy, by a woman who helped a dying thief, and by the thief who returned not to take, but to stand beside her when the flames came. In the aftermath of the battle, the valley was quiet but changed, heavier with loss, yet lighter with hope. Mara moved among her people, tending to wounds both visible and hidden. She saw the faces of those who had doubted her courage soften, replaced by a cautious respect. It wasn't just that she had survived the fight. It was that she had stood tall when fear whispered surrender. Her hands, once steady only in solitude, now steadied others. The woman who helped a wounded thief had become a beacon, not of power, but of unwavering resolve. Rael spent his days rebuilding what had been broken. His warriors, once scattered and lost, now found purpose in protecting this land as fiercely as he did. He never claimed the title of leader. Instead, he stood beside Mara as an equal, their bond forged in fire and unspoken sacrifice. Together, they forged a new kind of family, one not bound by blood or law, but by choice and trust. The stolen past that had once defined him now gave way to a future he was determined to protect. Word of their story spread beyond the valley, carried by travelers and whispered in distant taverns. It became a legend, the tale of a woman who saved a thief and the army that came with him. But to Mara and Rael, it was never about glory. It was about the fragile strength of mercy in a world ruled by harshness, about how one small act can ripple through time and change everything. They both knew that peace was not guaranteed, but it was worth every breath, every sacrifice. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of fire and blood, Mara stood on the porch, watching the horizon. She felt the weight of the past settle around her, but also the promise of what was to come. Rael joined her silently, his presence a steady warmth. "We're not just survivors," he said softly. "We're the beginning of something new." Mara nodded, her heart steady. The West was still wild, still dangerous. But now, it was also alive with possibility. As the stars blinked open one by one, Mara whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for everyone who would walk this land after them. For those who would choose mercy over vengeance, hope over fear, and courage over silence. Because in the harshest places, the smallest acts of kindness shine the brightest. And in that light, even the darkest dust can be made sacred. The seasons turned, bringing rain that soaked the parched earth and breathed life into the valley once more. Mara and Rael worked side by side, their partnership a quiet strength woven through the community. New faces arrived, some wary, some hopeful, drawn by the tales of peace and protection that had taken root. Children ran between the tents and cabins, their laughter a song of resilience echoing through the canyons. For the first time in many years, the valley felt like home, not just a refuge, but a place where futures were born. Mara taught the children how to read the land, to know the signs of rain and drought, and to carry kindness as fiercely as a blade. Rael shared stories of survival and redemption, reminding the youth that everyone has a past, but it's the choices we make now that define us. Together, they nurtured a generation that would carry forward the legacy born from a single act of mercy, the bread given to a bleeding thief in the dust. Yet, beneath the surface, old wounds still whispered. Some elders questioned the peace, clinging to memories of loss and betrayal. They feared that kindness would be mistaken for weakness, that the fragile bonds could be shattered by a single misstep. Mara met these fears not with denial, but with patience and proof. Through every healed wound, every life saved, every enemy turned ally. The valley's survival depended not just on strength, but on the courage to change. One chilly autumn night, Mara stood alone by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across her face. She thought of the man she had saved, the thief who became a leader, the warrior who returned with an army. Their story was far from over, but it was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who dared to see beyond the dust and choose mercy. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady heartbeat of the land beneath her feet, and whispered a promise to keep fighting, not with guns, but with grace. As dawn broke, painting the valley in hues of gold, Mara stepped forward with a renewed sense of purpose. The West was still wild, still unforgiving, but within its fierce beauty lay a power greater than any gun. The power to forgive, to rebuild, and to love. And in that truth, she found her strength. The following months tested the fragile peace Mara and Rael had fought so hard to build. Rumors of bandits lurking beyond the distant hills sent shivers through the camp. Traders began to travel with caution, and nights grew tense with whispered warnings. Yet, despite the unease, Mara refused to let fear dictate their lives. She rallied the people, urging vigilance, but also compassion, reminding them that the strength of their community lay in unity, not suspicion. Rael took it upon himself to scout the surrounding lands, riding out at dawn with a small band of warriors. His reports were cautiously optimistic, revealing only scattered groups of troublemakers who lacked the numbers to threaten the growing settlement. Still, he knew that the greatest dangers were often born from within, from distrust and old grudges that refused to fade. His resolve hardened. Protecting this newfound family meant confronting not just external enemies, but the shadows in their own hearts. One evening, Mara gathered the elders beneath the ancient oak at the camp center. The firelight flickered over weathered faces, their eyes reflecting both hope and lingering doubts. Our strength, Mara spoke softly but firmly, is not just in our rifles or numbers. It's in the choice we make each day to stand together. The room grew quiet, but the weight of her words settled deep. Change, she knew, was a slow river, sometimes turbulent, often unseen, but always moving forward. In the stillness of the night, Mara found herself walking the perimeter, the cold air biting at her skin. She paused where the stars spilled light onto the earth, thinking of the man who had returned with 500 warriors, the thief she had saved. Their fates intertwined like the roots of the trees around her, strong and tangled. She whispered a prayer for strength, for wisdom, and for the courage to carry what they had built through the storms yet to come. As dawn broke, casting a soft glow over the valley, Mara felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. The West was wild and unforgiving, but it was also a land where mercy could grow like a stubborn flower in cracked soil. And with that thought, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever trials the future held, knowing she was not alone. The calm shattered one cold morning when a rider burst into camp, breathless and wide-eyed. "A large militia is moving fast toward the valley," he gasped. "They're burning everything in their path." The camp erupted into controlled chaos as preparations for defense sprang into motion. Mara's voice rose above the noise, steady and commanding. "We stand together. No one fights alone." Warriors readied their weapons, women secured the children, and the entire community braced for what could be their greatest battle. Rail rode out with the scouts, his mind sharp and focused. He knew that the militia sought not just to conquer land, but to crush the hope they had dared to build. The stakes were higher than ever. This fight would decide not only survival, but the very soul of the valley. Every shadow, every gust of wind, held the tension of what was to come. And yet, in the heart of that storm, Mara's earlier words echoed. Strength is born from unity and mercy. When the enemy finally arrived, their numbers were overwhelming. Men fueled by hatred and greed, unaccustomed to facing a community united by more than guns. The battle that ensued was brutal, fierce, and unrelenting. Mara fought alongside the warriors, her aim true, her spirit unbreakable. She wasn't just defending land. She was defending a new way of life, one born from a single act of kindness that had blossomed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. In the heat of the fight, Mara saw Rail fall, struck down but still clutching his blade. Desperation surged through her veins, but she refused to falter. Rallying the fighters, she led a counterattack that pushed the militia back, turning their fury into retreat. When the dust settled, the valley stood scarred but undefeated. They had not only survived, they had proven that mercy was a weapon stronger than any bullet. As the sun set over the battle-worn valley, Mara knelt beside Rail, her hands steady as she tended to his wounds. Their eyes met, sharing a silent vow to protect what they had saved, no matter the cost. And in that quiet moment, the true power of their story was clear. Kindness had forged a shield unbreakable, and love had become their fiercest defense. The valley slowly healed from the wounds of battle, but the scars left behind were reminders of the price paid for peace. Mara moved with a newfound grace, her every step carrying the weight of leadership and hope. She tended to the fields, rebuilt homes, and comforted those who had lost loved ones. Rail's strength returned day by day, his spirit bolstered by the community they had forged together. They were no longer just survivors. They were the architects of a future where mercy reigned alongside strength. News of their resilience spread across the frontier, drawing others who sought refuge and kinship. Traders, settlers, and wanderers came, drawn not only by fertile land, but by the legend of a woman who saved a thief and the army that stood behind him. Mara welcomed them cautiously, knowing that every new face brought both opportunity and risk. But she believed in the power of community, the idea that even the smallest acts of kindness could build bridges over the widest divides. The children of the valley grew up with stories of the battle and the mercy that had sparked it. They learned not just how to wield weapons, but how to hold compassion as fiercely as a sword. Mara taught them that true courage was choosing to help when the world expected you to turn away, that strength was often found in gentleness. These lessons became the legacy she passed on, a legacy far richer than gold or land. One crisp autumn evening, as the firelight danced in the eyes of the gathered tribe, Mara stood before them and spoke. Her voice carried across the crowd, steady and warm. We are more than the dust and blood of the West. We are the hope born from mercy, the peace forged in fire, and the promise that kindness will always find a way. The people listened, their faces reflecting the depth of her words. It was a moment that would live long after the fires died. And as the stars winked overhead, Mara felt a quiet fulfillment settle within her, knowing that the valley, once fragile and divided, had become a place where mercy could grow strong, where kindness was a shield, and where the story of a woman's courage would echo through generations to come. Years passed, and the valley transformed into a sanctuary of unity and resilience. Mara and Rael's partnership deepened, their bond unshaken by time or trials. Together, they built a home that welcomed all, a place where stories were shared by firelight and laughter mingled with the rustling leaves. Their love was not the fiery blaze of legend, but the steady flame that warmed the coldest nights and illuminated the darkest paths. Mara's name became a symbol, whispered with reverence and gratitude. Songs were sung of the woman who saw a dying man in the dust and chose mercy over fear, who faced an army not with hatred, but with hope. And Rael, once an exile and thief, was remembered as the leader who returned not for revenge, but to protect the woman who saved him and the people who embraced them both. The valley thrived, its people bound not by blood alone, but by shared courage and compassion. The lessons Mara taught, that kindness is strength and mercy is power, shaped a community unlike any other. And though the Old West was still wild and unforgiving beyond the valley's borders, within it blossomed a peace hard-won and fiercely guarded. When Mara's time finally came, she passed with a smile, surrounded by those who loved her. The valley mourned, but celebrated a life that had changed the course of many. Her legacy lived on. In every seed planted, every child raised, every act of kindness passed from hand to hand. The story of a woman who helped a wounded thief bleeding in the dust, and the army he returned with, became a testament to the transformative power of mercy. As the winds whispered through the valley, carrying tales of courage and hope, one truth remained clear. In a world carved by conflict, it is the choice to show compassion, even in the darkest moments, that writes the greatest stories. In the unforgiving expanse of the Old West, where survival often meant turning a blind eye to suffering, Mara chose a different path, one carved by compassion and courage. Her decision to help a wounded thief bleeding in the dust did more than save a life. It ignited a chain of events that changed the fate of a valley and the hearts of 500 warriors. This story reminds us that mercy, even in the harshest of places, holds a power greater than any gun, a power to unite, to heal, and to rewrite history. Through the trials and battles, Mara and Rael taught us that true strength isn't measured by the force of one's weapon, but by the willingness to stand for what is right when no one else will. Their bond, forged in fire and sacrifice, showed that redemption is possible, that enemies can become allies, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple through time to create something far greater than ourselves. Now, think about your own life. How often do we pass by those in need, weighed down by fear or indifference? Mara's story challenges us to be brave in the face of uncertainty, to open our hands when it is easier to close them, and to recognize that every act of mercy carries the potential to change not only one life, but many. It's a call to embrace empathy as a form of power and to trust that hope can grow in the most unlikely places. As this tale lingers in your mind, remember that you, too, hold the ability to shape the future with the choices you make today. Whether in a small gesture or a bold decision, kindness is the seed from which peace and change are born. Let Mara's legacy inspire you to be the light in a world often shadowed by doubt, because it is through our compassion that the truest stories are written. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe and join a community that believes in the power of storytelling to heal, and inspire. Like the video to help spread this message, and share your thoughts below. What act of kindness has changed your life or someone you know? Together, let's keep these stories alive, reminding us all that even in the wildest frontiers, mercy rides beside us.